Welcome back. Today we're going to build some mid-span load-bearing walls and the connecting rake walls. I do apologize for the unsightly beginning of this video, but it is the dog days of summer, as they say in baseball. Not that I know anything about baseball, but with both temps and humidity in the high 80s, you do what you have to do. So let's take a look at what we're going to do today. So this is where we left off last time. The front wall is complete, and now we are going to add a couple of short mid-sections of load-bearing wall at the mid-span of this room, and then down the road, the taller walls on the front will be the last thing to put in place. As a reminder, it's a single slope roof from low to high. After we get those short load-bearing walls in, then we'll attach these rake walls. This first one won't have any windows or doors in it, which will be nice. And the second one will have a bathroom window in the middle of this rake wall section. The rake walls aren't terribly complicated, but there are some considerations as to how they interact with the abutting walls. Normally, if the walls were the same height, you'd have an overlapping top plate, which would help to secure, but with rake walls, you don't really have that. So I thought about using strapping just to add additional security, but I will also be adding some 6-inch structural screws to the connections between the top plate and the studs on the adjoining walls for extra security. The thing about rake walls really is just knowing the pitch and the run, the horizontal distance between your starting point and where you want a stud to go to determine the height of that stud. The pitch, you just have to figure it out depending on what the pitch of roof is. Mine's going to be a 3.5 12 pitch, and all my calculations are based on that, but if you have a 412 pitch or a 612 pitch, it's the same process. But I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the rake walls. So for this first load-bearing wall, it's only about 6 feet long, but it's about 12.5 feet tall. And as you can see, it's walking more than I expected. Normally on the edge, I have a blocking that would stop that. And in this case, I didn't put it there because I didn't expect it to walk that fast and far. But after you get it up in the air, it's just easier to walk it because I knew there was a block there, and then I could just shimmy it to where I needed it to go. I put a screw on that one side so I could pivot it without it moving too much. It's a little bit awkward to work with because it is a 12.5 foot wall and the center of gravity is above my head height, so I just have to be careful with that as I get it up. You might have also seen there's a doorway in that. That's for the bathroom entryway. So I cut this section to test the height of the studs for my first calculations, just to make sure that the way I was doing the calculations was the way I wanted it to. And so as I mentioned, you just need to know your pitch and your run. So in my case, it's a 3.5-inch 12 pitch, and you can put that into a calculator, and then you just measure from the inside of your adjoining wall to your stud location and put that in the calculator, and that'll give you the rise of the stud that you need. Actually, it's the rise plus the height of the original wall because it's just going to give you the difference. So you have to be careful with that. You also have to be careful with whether or not you are measuring to the short or the long end of the stud. You can do either, it doesn't matter. You just need to know what you're doing so that you are correctly measuring it. So I've cut both the top plate, again just using some calculator math and determining what the diagonal length is, and a couple of studs to form a frame of the wall, or a real skeleton of the wall. And I'm also double checking these studs for parallel, not only at the base, but also around mid-length, because if they aren't perfectly straight, then the top plate won't be in the right position, and then the rest of the studs may not fall where they need to. So at least for 2 or 3 of those first studs, it's nice to double check that your calculations or your measurements from the end wall to that stud are the same at multiple locations on the stud. After you've done that, you can raise the wall, as I did here, much more easily with just a few studs in, and then by calculating the length of the rest of the studs, I can do what I did, which is I just took all of the measurements at one time, cut all of the studs at one time, and that enabled me to lift the wall and build it in place. So it's a little bit of a combination of that method, so that I was able to accomplish that on my own, and then nail everything at the bottom, and then come back and nail everything at the top. The process on this wall is very similar, except that there is a window in this wall, so I have to take into consideration where the full-length studs will land versus the cripple studs in the window doorway section. So I'm avoiding where the window and door will go, or the window, there isn't a door. I'm avoiding where that window will go as I'm putting these sections together so that I can raise the wall as I did on the other side and then just build the window in between. Again, if I try to do all of that while it's on the ground, I may not be able to lift it on my own. But here you can see we've got the frame in, and that's going to be the pitch of the roof. As I said, that's 3.5 by 12, or 3.5, 12. And it will continue at that pitch to the deck side wall, where the highest walls in the house will be. It's always important to know which of your walls are load bearing versus non-load bearing. In this case, neither of these rake walls is load bearing because the front wall, these mid-span walls, and then that final tall wall will be the load bearing walls that carry the weight of the roof rafters in the long term. Here I've already calculated the height of the jack studs and the cripple studs, so I've cut those. And I also calculated the location of the king studs outside of the jack studs, so I just have to sandwich everything where it needs to be, and we should be in good shape. As mentioned on the last video, I am starting to use the OSB for headers. In this case, I actually had some extra 3/4 subfloor that is essentially OSB, so I'm using that for the header for the window that will go in that rake wall. And because the rake wall isn't load bearing, I shouldn't need anything more than a 2x8 for this header, but I'm still going to use a 2x10 on all the exterior wall headers, whether they're load bearing or not. I will use 2x8 headers on the truly interior wall door and passageway openings. Here I'm adding the 2x6 bottom and top plate to the header. Again, this is just much more convenient to do on a flat surface that you can work on rather than trying to do it in place. This stud was actually a little split, so I put some nails in the top of it just to keep it together. Again, it's not really interfering with anything, but the nice thing about having both the top and bottom plate on these headers is that it just makes placing the cripples much nicer, and when you put in the window, it's a cleaner work surface. The one thing that I did run into that I'll mention is that this rake wall and the adjoining short section of that load bearing wall that we created in the first part of the video, there's tension there, and so it's pulling that mid wall just a little bit out of plumb by about 3/4 of an inch. So what we'll do is when we put in the cross beam that connects those two mid walls, we'll make sure that both of those walls are perfectly plumb before we secure that in, and that will finally define that space and the plumbness of those walls. The thing I didn't do this time that I will do next time is the bottom and top plate for the header that I put in, as well as the sill for the window. I'm going to drop those down to the ground next to the bottom plate so that I can transfer the markings for where the studs go for 16-aught center, because it'll just save time. In this case, what I did was I just ran a kind of a plumb line and used a level to make sure that the cripples were in the place they needed to be and parallel. But if I drop those plates down to the bottom plate and transfer those markings, I don't have to spend any time doing that at all. And now I'm going to replace all of the bracing that I took down so that I could raise the walls and call it a day. So this is where I'm at. Thanks for watching. See you next time.